If you visit the Queen Mary today and you go into her old boiler rooms and turbo generator rooms, you will notice there is a complete lack of equipment. There are no boilers or generators left, and 2 of the 4 engines are gone. They were all removed in the late 1960s when the ship was being converted from an ocean liner to a hotel for Long Beach. And the idea was that there was going to be a massive museum of the sea that was going to be built by Jacques Cousteau and his group. And it was going to be this massive museum that would have impressed everybody around the world. Unfortunately, with financial issues, the ideas had to be cut back to the point where the actual museum was only built in a couple of the rooms right here towards the center of the ship. As a result, the loss of all those original pieces of the Queen Mary's propulsion have left these vast, cavernous, cathedral-like rooms at the bottom of the ship. And as a result, a lot of people have wondered, is the ship now top-heavy? If you know anything about ships, such as ocean liners, you know that all the heaviest components are usually placed at the bottom. All the boilers, all the generators, the engines, the cargo, oil tanks, water tanks, and whatever fuel that they carry, such as coal or oil or gas or diesel, all of it is stored at the bottom. Those are the heaviest things. And they do that so that way all the weight of the top of the ship, all the rooms, all the passengers, all that stuff is balanced out. And therefore the ship is less likely to keel over for no reason. That is why all the heaviest stuff is on the bottom. So if they've removed all that stuff from the Queen Mary, is she now top heavy? And believe it or not, there are a lot of people who think she is. And because of that, I start to wonder, I'm like, well, if she's top heavy, how do you think she's survived being in Long Beach for 55 years? Wouldn't she have keeled over in heavy winds or whenever there's been an earthquake that has caused her to roll just a little bit? You know, so it's rather interesting that people think that. But let me tell you the reason why the Queen Mary is not top heavy. So after they removed all that stuff, the construction crew that was in charge of the removal process in the 1960s knew that you can't just take all that stuff off of a ship and expect it to float. It would be top heavy. So what they did was, there are a bunch of tanks in the ship, right? If I were to show you a cross-section of the entire ship, what you will notice is that there are several tanks, probably closer to 77 of them. And some of them are designed for ballast, and some of them are designed for fuel oil. And a couple of them are designed to hold potable drinking water. And all these tanks are lined up towards the outer rim of the ship and also in between the 2 layers of the keel. The keel is made up of an outer shell of steel plates that protect the ship from the seawater. Then there is a large area about 6 feet tall or 2 meters where there's just plenty of space for putting ballast. And then that's protected by what's called the tank top, which is an inner layer of hull that protects you from the incoming rush of seawater if the outer hull is breached. Anyway, let's not get too deep into that yet. But essentially, the ship's outer layer is made up of a series of tanks. Now, what is ballast, you ask? I know some people have watched the movie Poseidon Adventure, and they said, well, the ship's captain says we need to take on ballast. What is ballast? Well, for those of you who don't know, ballast is essentially just weight, usually in the form of seawater. So if a ship is becoming unbalanced, if there happens to be more weight on the top than there is on the bottom, even while the ship is out at sea, for any reason, the ship can try to mitigate that by adding seawater into its ballast tanks and weighing down the bottom of the ship so it doesn't sit so high in the water. And that's very useful. Ships do that all the time. Even submarines have ballast tanks which allow them to either float or sink. And that's how they control their buoyancy. So that's what ballast tanks are. And the ship, the Queen Mary, had a lot of them. And let's not forget the oil tanks which held the fuel for the ship also acted as ballast, weighing down the bottom of the ship, keeping it upright. Well, when they emptied all those oil tanks out, and when they removed all the heavy boilers and generators and engines, they had to counteract the loss of weight. So what they did was they filled a lot of those oil tanks and some of those ballast tanks with drilling mud. It's a type of mud that is not very corrosive, but is very good at weighing things down. I've also have it on good authority that some of the ballast tanks and some of the oil tanks are filled with metal pellets designed for ballasting a ship permanently. So usually it's put on small museum ships or things that can't constantly take on new water ballast. And then finally, there are some tanks on the Queen Mary that still hold water for ballast. Although I have been told by some historians that they no longer use seawater as ballast on the Queen Mary. Now they use fresh water because fresh water is less corrosive than seawater. So some of the tanks on the Queen Mary actually hold fresh water for ballast. Now the reason why is because even though the ship isn't going anywhere, it does see a shift in its weight load. Some days there's a lot of people on there, some days there isn't. Or if there should ever be a small leak that starts to weigh down the ship and the ship starts going down and down and down, they might need to raise it up while they still work on the leak. They don't want the ship to be too bottom heavy, so they can actually release some of that fresh water to lighten the ship. Now, to my knowledge, they've never really had to adjust these ballast tanks very much. Obviously, as you can imagine, since the ship doesn't receive much changes, it's not like it's taking on new cargo all the time. It doesn't need to be adjusted very much, but on occasion, it will. And on a side note, some of you have noticed that if you look at the Queen Mary from the front, she is taking on a port side list, which means that she's tilting ever so slightly to the port side. A lot of people think that that's actually a mistake. They think, oh no, nobody's watching for the balance of the ship and she's actually listing. Well, actually, I was recently told that's not an accident. The Queen Mary is listing to port about 2 degrees, and the reason why is to help drain rainwater. There, believe it or not, Southern California does get rain. So the way that they maintain that port side list is to carry more water ballast on the port side than on the starboard side. And there's been some really interesting things that have happened with these ballast tanks. So many of you have probably heard that there has been times where there is water sitting on the bottom of the Queen Mary. If you go into the boiler rooms in the past or even now, you might even see some water there sometimes. It's important to say that in the water softening plant of the Queen Mary, which is closer to the bow, there is currently water there at the bottom, but that's for a Halloween set piece. That's not actually an accident. But in the past, there has been water buildup. And as far as I understand, that is not entirely seawater. It's not that the ship took on a major leak. It's actually usually from plumbing for the hotel services that hasn't been maintained. Or in some cases, it's from the ballast tanks. Now, these ballast tanks have access hatches. Basically, they're just doors that you lift up and can crawl into to maintain the ballast tanks when they're empty. And they have rubber gaskets that keep a good seal. And there have been 1 or 2 times in the past where these old gaskets that are now 55 years old or older have failed, and the ballast tanks have just sprayed and drained into the empty boiler rooms of the ship. So that is part of the reason why that has happened. And when those ballast tanks drain, the ship will list to one side or the other more than the other. And so they have had to fix those problems in the past. When I was last on the Queen Mary, there was no more leaks on the ship. So I don't know if it's because they've maintained it enough that it hasn't leaked, or if they had just finished cleaning it up at the moment. She's not taking on tons of seawater. There might be some areas here or there where drops of seawater are coming in through the holes where the rivets are put into the plates. It's not at the moment a major issue, and it can be fixed with proper dry docking, to which my understanding is that at this very moment, the city of Long Beach is looking into building a permanent dry dock nearby where the Queen Mary can be serviced, as well as incoming ships that come to drop off cargo, and cruise ships as well can use this new dry dock that they're looking to build. So anyway, that is how a ship's ballast system works, and that is how the Queen Mary stays upright even without all of her heavy boilers and machinery. Anyway, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye. Thank you for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this content, consider supporting my channel by either signing up for my Patreon or to my YouTube memberships. That way you can get exclusive perks in return. Links are in the description below. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.